You're listening to Season 2, Episode 7 of the Attempt Adventure Podcast. A podcast all about travel, finding adventure every day, and seeking out adventurous ways to make life more interesting. From Bangkok, Thailand, I am your host, Michael Desrosiers, joined as always by my co-host,
James Barrett from Boulder, Colorado.
In this episode, we are joined by adventurer and podcaster Scott Gurian from the Far From Home podcast. Scott shares his adventures traveling in Iran, road tripping across Mongolia, exploring the ruins of Chernobyl, participating in a sacred Peruvian ayahuasca ceremony, and more. But first, before we get to that, James, did you do anything new or adventurous this week, or are you going to be receiving the first penalty of Season 2?
You know, I did. I tried a authentic Nepalese restaurant.
Now that's interesting. What did you have?
I don't quite know. I sort of just went in and was like, feed me, please. And they brought me things, and everything was delicious. A lot of vegetables. I believe everything I had was, at the very least, vegetarian. It was great. It was fun.
That's very cool, James.
I'll find the name of it and shout them out later.
I don't think I've ever had Nepalese food before.
It was very similar to Indian food, like what we think of as Indian food.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
But different in certain ways. I don't know. I liked it better, I think. Anyone from Nepal listening, send me recipes.
Yeah, for sure. Very good. Well, James, I have to admit, I did not do anything new or interesting this week. All right, so folks, how this works. We have a game that we play where every week we must do something new or adventurous. And we can define that however we want, but if we haven't done anything, we receive a penalty. The penalty used to be that the other person had to give us a challenge to do, but we ended up being far too nice to each other. So this year we have introduced the Wheel of Penalty, a wheel of 10 different challenges of various descriptions. If we fail to do our penalty in an allotted time, and James, you can actually give me the allotted time that you're going to give me, because some of these might be a little bit more than a 1 week thing. If we fail to do the penalty in the allotted time, we owe the person 50 American dollars. That's 25 Jeffersons. That's 50 Sacagaweas. Yeah, I'm talking real American cash.
That's a lot of pennies.
And actually, one of the spaces on the wheel is automatic $50 penalty, and that's a totally possible valid thing. However, James, just to make it a little bit more interesting, I've also added a segment called Reverse. And if it lands on reverse, you have to spin the wheel and do whatever it gives you. Yeah. But there's other things on there. So let's find out what I get. I've got the wheel open right now, and I am going to spin it. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm taking the first penalty of the season. I'm spinning the wheel. Here we go. Wheel of Penalty. Oh my gosh. It was so close to automatic 50. It was next to it. Oh, you just lucked out. It's just go hang out at your nearest airport for a while.
Oh, cool. Your airport's cool. Dang.
Yeah. So I'm going to go have to hang out at the airport this week, I guess. So how much time are you giving me to do this challenge?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay. That's fair. I'll do it. And remember, with the penalty, we have to film it. We must make a short film of it, or we automatically lose that $50.
That's an interesting one, because in the U.S., that's more difficult. They don't like people hanging around airports. I'm glad it's not me, because the closest one I have is like Rocky Mountain Regional Airport, and I don't know what I would do.
Go there, have like a beer at the bar, come back home.
I don't even think they have one.
Okay, well, moving on. Before we get into the episode, just a little request, guys. If you enjoy the show, if you like what we do, please share the show and give us a review if you don't mind. Even word of mouth helps a lot, helps us to reach a wider audience. And a little reminder that we've got a monthly challenge. Our new challenge comes from Linda King, the Smart Travelista, and that is travel writing. Write 100 or 1,000 words describing your hometown or where you live. And finally, if you want to join our little community and help sponsor and support the show, check out our Ko-fi page, ko-fi.com/attemptadventure. There you can make a one-time donation to buy us a beer, or you can sign up for a membership and receive all sorts of little benefits, including insider scoops about our upcoming guests and the ability to submit questions for us to ask in our interviews to those guests. It's just a way to help pay for hosting, cover the cost of our domain, website, all of that stuff.
Oh, I do have I do have one request. I would like if we ever have to pay each other $50,
Mm-hmm.
but I kind of want it to be paid out in Venezuelan money because I want to
Okay.
feel like a big shot.
Okay, so what is the exchange rate?
$50 is 24,690,691 Venezuelan bolivares.
Okay, so we just have to pay each other in stupid currency exchanges.
Yeah, $1 is 493,814,
Okay.
which, maybe not. That might be offensive to anyone in Venezuela. Sorry, guys. You guys are in a rough spot right now.
I mean, exchange rate doesn't necessarily correlate to strength of currency, but in this case it does.
In this case, it does. Some it does not. Yeah, anyway, continue. I just thought that was funny. Anyway.
That is hilarious. Okay, well, you have to pay me. If you ever have to do it, I will accept $2 bills. You're going to have to find a way to either pay me in $2 bills or in...
I'm going to have to mail you $2 bills.
Kennedy half dollars.
Just mail you just 50-cent pieces. That would be sweet. I'll just give you a pouch of coins.
Do you remember those really big Eisenhower dollars that were like really, really big? Just a bunch of those, 50 of those.
Part of my graduation present from high school, like when I graduated high school, my uncle gave me, I think, $500. 200 of it was in Sacagawea dollars.
Just a bag of
He
gold
just handed me a
coins.
satchel of gold coins.
Did you feel like a cartoon bank robber?
I felt like that, and I felt like a medieval rich guy.
I love using like dumb denominations of U.S. currency because it just really trips people up.
Like, I do remember how all vending machines used to take those 50-cent pieces, but no one ever had them. So
Same with the $2 bills. People just hoard them when they get them. People just keep them.
And it's to the point where people will like call the cops on you because they think they're fake.
Yeah. Or if you pay with the $2 bill.
If I was going to make counterfeit currency, I mean, I feel like that's something you go all in on. If you're going to try, you might as well.
If you don't think that $2 is a real denomination of currency, you wouldn't invent a fake denomination of money. You would copy one that's already made.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go to the trouble of drawing the signing of the Declaration of Independence on a currency that doesn't exist, or on a bill that doesn't exist. That's a really complicated picture on the back of the $2 bill.
Yeah, and like U.S. money it looks simple, but it's very difficult to counterfeit. But whatever, we're not going to get into counterfeiting. This isn't that kind of podcast.
It is not. But what kind of podcast it is, James, is a podcast about talking to fascinating adventurers from around the world. And that's what we're going to do today. Well, without further ado, why don't we just jump right into that interview? It's a fantastic one. I know that our listeners are going to love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Scott from the Far From Home podcast, here to talk about his adventures all around the world. Welcome, Scott. Welcome to the show. So glad that you're here. The first thing I always like to ask our guests is just to tell us who you are, where you are, and a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Scott Gurian. I'm a journalist and podcast producer. The reason I guess that I do that is because I think of myself as a lifelong learner, and I love experiencing different cultures, different places, different languages, different foods. And so that kind of gives me an excuse to go to these interesting places around the world and then share my experiences with other people. I travel, or at least during non-COVID times, pre-COVID times, I've traveled a fair amount and met people and found interesting stories, everywhere from Cambodia to Iran to Mongolia to Chernobyl to Peru, all over the world. So that's kind of what I do. And I'm based in northern New Jersey, just outside of New York City.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit about your podcast, your Far From Home podcast.
So I've been doing it a few years now. I describe it as a podcast of where I tell fascinating stories from far-flung places around the world. And it's not just like talking about it, but actually bringing my microphone along as I go on these adventures. So people listen and they say, I feel like I was there with you, to kind of bring people on these kind of adventures just from the comfort of their headphones to places oftentimes off the beaten path, places that the average person would not travel, the places like Chernobyl or Iran or Mongolia, that aren't typical tourist types of sites. So I've been doing the show for about 5 years, over 5 years now. And the way that it started is that so I have a background in journalism. I worked in public radio here in the US for many years. And so I already had that experience. I also love traveling. I've been traveling for a long time. And a number of years ago, my brother and he's a few years younger than me. He's also kind of adventurous. We got in the habit of taking a big trip every year, like over Christmas and New Year's, because we don't have a lot of close family left in the area. We figured that instead of just sitting home and making dinner for ourselves, we might as well go somewhere interesting, do something, preferably somewhere warmer at that time of year when it's winter, here in the Northern
Right.
Hemisphere. So we started going on these trips every year, and we went to Thailand and Cambodia one year. We went to Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. We went to, all sorts of places. And one year we were in Cuba. And we were in a tour group then. We don't usually do tour groups. We figured we would in Cuba just for the logistics of getting around and everything. We do that.
Right,
and so
yeah.
we were in this tour group, and we kind of had some issues with our guide, and he kind of got drunk and abandoned our group one evening. And so all of us in the tour group kind of bonded in the absence of our tour guide. And we, became good friends and kept in touch. And one of the people in our tour group was this woman, Rosie, who's, a little older than us, like middle-aged, and she was there with her husband, Alan. And they're both British, but they now live in Australia. And Rosie, very adventurous, has traveled quite a bit around the world. And so we became good friends with her. We kept in touch. A few months later, she contacted my brother and me and said, hey, I'm planning on going on this big, crazy trip with my best friend, Jane, on this event that's called the Mongol Rally. And you'd get a little tiny car, and you'd raise money for charity, and you drive from the UK to Mongolia.
Oh,
and
fun.
would you and your brother be interested in joining us? And we said, that sounds amazing. And it was pretty soon after, we decided to do that trip. I figured, okay, I should document this. I should start a podcast. This sounds like the perfect idea, not just the trip itself, but even just all the preparations that go into a trip like that. As you might imagine, it took months and months of planning of what kind of car do you buy, getting your visas and vaccinations, planning the route, all the logistics, that go into it. So that was kind of how I started it. And the whole first season of my show was documenting that crazy adventure. And then when I got to the finish line in, Ulan-Ude, Siberia, just north of Mongolia, they all flew home, and I decided I wanted to keep traveling. And so a friend actually flew out to meet me, and I decided to drive all the way back across Siberia and Ukraine and Poland back to Europe. So that was pretty interesting, and got to see a whole other part of the world that
That's so cool.
I've never been to. So that's kind of the story of how it came into being.
That is so cool. People don't really do big trips like that via road anymore. People fly, people maybe take a train. I thought that, that kind of epic road trip like that across the world isn't really possible anymore, but I guess it is. I guess you can still do stuff like that.
Yeah, when we told people we were planning on driving to Mongolia, we often got the reaction like, can you do that? And why not? The land is all connected. I mean, the roads have been there. It's the ancient Silk Road. It's been there for millennia. So it's physically possible. People don't even think they could do it, but why not? So
exactly. I think that's great, right? With adventure, why not? That's really the question I guess people should be asking themselves,
Yeah. And as far as your point that, people often just fly to places, they don't often drive. It's often said it's a small world, which is true to a certain degree, but the world is actually really big. Like in between the cities, there's vast expanses that the average person never goes to, giant regions, even giant continents that, people never travel to.
Right.
And so there's so much to see, so many places that people don't even think about. And when you're just like parachuting in for a few days, flying or somewhere, you don't really get to see it as much as.
Sure, yeah.
I love train travel, but driving's even better. And I guess if you really want to get adventurous, you could walk or ride a bicycle. But I don't know if I'm quite into that. But driving, it's great. I mean, you get to see, you can pull off whenever you want and go down some side road or check it out. And
yeah, you have that freedom.
Plan your own itinerary. Yeah. Definitely.
That's really cool. With that in mind, what is your definition of adventure then? What does adventure actually mean to you? Because I know you also mentioned that during these COVID years, you've sort of been doing things closer to home. So How do you keep adventuring? What does adventure mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it can mean many different things, and obviously some people are more adventurous than others. And I don't feel like you need to drive to Mongolia to go on an adventure, like
Sure. Yeah.
especially in these COVID times. Finding things closer to home. I've been, just figuring out how to just, do. I've been doing a lot of cooking, going to the local Indian grocery store or the Thai market and picking up different ingredients I've never used before, and different recipes. I've gotten into home brewing and trying, make my own beer and wine. I've done some local exploring, done a lot of hiking, just locally, places I've never been, even though I grew up in the area and thought I knew it pretty well. But there's some really cool places in the area. Gotten involved in volunteering with some local groups. There's this group in the town near me. They have this annual Design Week event, and they have this walk every year through like this local brook that it just flows through the town. No one really thinks much of it because a lot of it just goes through tunnels and it's ditches behind houses and buildings. So they did every year they do this like nature walk down this creek, and parts of it you're like walking through these storm drains under parking lots. Like one of them's like a quarter of a mile long, and you're wearing headlamps,
Wow.
spelunking, and so it's like you think you know the town well, but suddenly you're going underground underneath the parking lot of a shopping center. Like it's super cool, and yeah, you could do these amazing adventures without even leaving your neighborhood.
Right. I think that's really important to keep in mind because not everyone has the either resources or even the desire necessarily to go far, go on a massive trip to the other side of the world. But there are ways to have adventure even in your own hometown. And I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Not everyone's ready to, hop on a plane and go to some developing world country. Like, I think the little you can do to kind of maybe try something you've never tried before, learn a new language, like just be willing to go just a little bit out of your comfort zone. And I feel like you'll be a better person for it.
Well, I want to talk about Chernobyl because that's fascinating. Not a lot of people have been there. So how did you get to Chernobyl? What was that like?
Yeah. And it's, of course, relevant now that it's back in the news.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, when we were driving, I was driving back to Europe. So I was driving with my friend Donna. We were kind of going across Siberia, and then we kind of, at a certain point, had to make a decision. Well, how are we going to go? We could have gone north, through the Baltics, through Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, St. Petersburg, or we could go south through Ukraine. And my mother's side of the family is from Ukraine, so I was kind of interested, because of that, but also just the idea of Chernobyl, having heard about it. And I did a little research and thinking at first, well, is it even possible to go? But it actually is. I mean, there's tens of thousands of tourists a year who go. And I'm sure it's even more now since that HBO, documentary series came out. But so it is possible, and people say, is it safe? But they have tour guides who take people, and they take them all the time, and they have Geiger counters, and they know where it is safe and isn't safe. Like there are certain areas that are definitely not safe, and they say, stay here, stay on the pavement, don't go into the woods over there, because that's like some of the highest radiation levels in the world, and you definitely do not want to go there. But if you're here and you come on a tour for a day, or they have extended tours, you could even stay overnight and meet some of the local. There's like elderly local people who refuse to leave, who still live in the village. Yeah. And they seem to be okay. They haven't come down with all kinds of weird cancers and everything you'd think they would have. So it is, certain areas, it is safe to, or certainly for a short visit, they say that you get as much radiation dosage as like an X-ray at the dentist or something. So, it's less than like a transatlantic flight or smokers. Right. Apparently, there's a lot of radiation you get from cigarettes. Apparently, there's other sources. So they've measured it, and I trust that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So, so you just kind of do what they say, and they have detectors when you're leaving, so you're making sure you don't have radiation like on your shoes that you're tracking back to Kyiv or anything. They have a lot of steps of precaution. So, but it's an incredibly fascinating, the eeriest place I've ever been.
Just the pictures I've seen of it are just so spooky, of just like the abandoned Ferris wheel and the abandoned classroom and all of that.
I mean, technically, they say that the tours aren't allowed to like take you inside of any buildings, but all the tour companies do. And I think the government just kind of looks the other way. And so you're wandering through these abandoned buildings, old, preschools, or, the community center with what was the Olympic-sized swimming pool that's now decaying, or, a auditorium. It's just super eerie to see stuff in this state of decay, and you're stepping over broken glass and everything. Like, this would never be allowed here. You'd never mind the radiation, just like the lawsuit hazards or whatever, that you trip on something. But yeah, just to walk through this abandoned village that was abandoned vacated in the course of a few hours in 1986, when people were told, okay, you have to leave. You'll be able to come back within a few weeks, and they've never been allowed back. And so it's truly, it's a cliche, but it's truly like a time capsule. Like you're seeing calendars still on the wall from that month and that year. Yeah, it's just a snapshot in time. So an incredibly fascinating place.
Wow. I think that's another example of a place that people just wouldn't think to visit. I think that even if people did visit Ukraine, a lot of people wouldn't even think it was possible to visit Chernobyl. So how do you find these places? How do you discover these places that people don't even think about? How did you? So you mentioned how you discovered the trip to Mongolia, but how did you even think to visit Chernobyl?
I mean, like I said, I'm kind of a curious person. I read things. I'm a journalist, so I'm always naturally kind of looking into things.
Okay.
I'll read some article somewhere and I'll save it away. I have a big, file with all kinds of possible story ideas and travel ideas. There are websites like Atlas Obscura and places like Unknown, hidden, interesting, quirky, there's a lot of places like that. There's so much online now that, so many people on Instagram or Twitter or wherever that, well, I don't know. I was going to say there's very few parts of the world that haven't totally been traveled, but no, that's probably not true. I don't know how many people go to Central African Republic or Equatorial Guinea or something, but right. You could find resources on pretty much anywhere. I mean, Lonely Planet they have this thorn tree message board, website where they have a message board for pretty much every country and every territory in the world. So if you're going to Namibia or wherever, some random place, and you post there and say, hey, I need some advice. How often do the buses run? And you'll find someone who will respond to you. So there's a lot of resources online and just through social media. I'm going somewhere and I'll post something online, and I know a lot of people in a lot of places, or someone will say, oh, my friend has been there or knows someone who's there. So just through friends of friends, word of mouth.
Well, another one is Iran. So I know that. Well, I'm not sure if it's changed nowadays, but for the last year or two, it was impossible to travel as a U.S. citizen. Mm-hmm. From what I understand, it's very difficult to go. You have to go with is it still true? You have to go with a tour group, or how did you go? Tell me about your experience there.
Well, this was part of our road trip to Mongolia. So Iran was one of the countries, one of the like 18 countries that we drove through as part of that trip. So we went southeast across, Europe, and then across Turkey, and then Iran, and then Central Asia, Turkmenistan, and a bunch of other stands. So we could have gone various different ways. We could have just gone through southern Russia or something, but that wouldn't have been that interesting. I mean, I figure Iran is one of those places that very few Westerners get to go, and it's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And it was really good timing when we were there. This was in the summer of 2016, and it was right after President Obama had signed the nuclear deal with Iran. So people were so thrilled to meet Americans. And I mean, to be clear, I think Iranians, just Persian hospitality, even if we went now, whenever we went, I think it's the friendliest people of any country, anywhere I've been, anywhere in the world. You meet total strangers and, they're so excited to meet you, meet Westerners, practice their English. And within 5 minutes, they're inviting you to come to their home, come for tea, come for dinner, meet their families, stay with them. And they know a lot about Western culture, like that we met this young high school girl who was studying Shakespeare in school, and her favorite TV show is Desperate Housewives. So it's amazing. Persians are incredibly warm and welcoming, but I think especially when we were there after that nuclear deal was signed, where the relations had kind of thawed between the U.S. and Iran, it was a really good time to go. So yes, if you're an American, a Brit, or a Canadian, you have to have a tour guide in order to get a visa to travel across the country. If you're from other places, I don't think you do. But so, yeah, we hired a tour guide, and he wasn't a government minder. Like, he really was just a tour guide. And he just met us at the border from the west where we entered from Turkey. And then he just rode along in one of our vehicles throughout the journey till we exited the border on the east by Turkmenistan. And we, so we got to do a little bit of touristy sorts of things, and got to, see Iran and Mashhad, which is another big city, and some really big temples. And it's a fascinating country. I would love to go back someday.
I've always wanted to go. You made a really good point. I think that sometimes people overthink. When they're thinking about traveling somewhere, they overthink it. They think that people are going to be angry or hateful or maybe discriminatory, or even that you'd be in danger traveling to some of these places. But People are really just people. I think most people around the world do realize that there's a difference between the country's governments and the people of that country and how they, interact with one another. I found that to be the case as well.
Oh, yeah. Same thing in Cuba. I mean, you think
Yeah.
Cubans would hate Americans, but also very friendly, warm people there as well. That's the case in many of my, many places I visited. Of course, Iran, my brother and I are driving across there and our father was really worried about us and, they're going to be chanting death to America and you're going to be in danger and it's not safe. And, these are the perceptions people have. And that's not to say there aren't genuinely dangerous places in the world, but you've got to do your research. You can't just rely on the media and what you see from afar. Like, if in doubt, you reach out to people through social media, whatever. Like, you want to talk to people there on the ground and ask them, okay, well, I mean, you live there. Tell me what it's like. Do you think it's safe for me to go? If they think it's unsafe, then I'll trust what they say because they live there. They know, but they're going to know way better than watching the news on CNN or so. Like, it's hard to, you get these impressions, but it's really hard to know from afar. Also as part of our trip, I mean, before we went to Iran, we were going across Turkey. And this was the summer of 2016, and it was just really bad timing. We ended up at the border to enter Turkey 6 days after the attempted coup. And so we're kind of scrambling at the last minute, like, is it safe? Can we go there? We're trying to explore other options. Do we even have other options with the visa situation, and our timeline and everything? I think there were some bombings at the airport in Istanbul. It was just a bad situation and we were concerned. So we reached out to a bunch of people online and, friends of friends who lived there. And we said, hey, you're there on the ground. Tell us, what do you think? Do you think it's safe for us to drive across the country? Can we go? And they said, yeah, we think it's okay. Just take some precautions. And so we followed their advice. And we were still, cautious. You want to be prudent. So we purposely kind of just drove across most of the country. We skipped Istanbul and Ankara, which is a shame because I really still haven't been to Istanbul and I really would, I still would like to go there. So unfortunately missed that. We just went to Cappadocia, which is amazing in central, these old like caves where people have lived in for millennia and they launch all these hot air balloons every morning. Cool. It's such a cool place. Yeah. So we got to see that at least. But yeah, no, that's what I recommend to people, ask the locals, and you could always hire a local, like what journalists do, hire what they call a fixer, like a local person, like a driver or translator. I mean, you may need it for the language, but even if you speak the language, like just someone who can show you around, tell you, where is it safe to go? Where is it not safe to go? Like, trust their advice.
Right. But man, what an experience. So where would you like to go? What is your next sort of adventure after it's safe and practical to travel again?
I want to reschedule the trip I was supposed to go on before all this started. I was supposed to go to Morocco. I still haven't been to Morocco, and that's been on my bucket list. I was supposed to go to Morocco, meet a friend there, and then cross the border to go to southern Algeria to this film festival in a refugee camp in the middle of the Sahara Desert.
Wow.
So yes, that would be an amazing story and an amazing experience. Obviously, it's been canceled the last few years because a refugee camp is the last place you want COVID-19 spreading. But I'm sure they'll go back to once everything is safe again. And Algeria is also not a country that many Westerners get to go to. In terms of upcoming I haven't planned that yet or rescheduled. I actually just got an invitation yesterday for a friend who lives in the Netherlands now, is getting married over the summer. So I'll finally take another transatlantic flight. And I guess while I'm there, I'll probably, I don't know, I have a friend in Switzerland. I may do a little bit more traveling. And actually, I also tentatively, it's so hard to plan anything nowadays, but I tentatively actually signed up for a travel bloggers conference actually in Phuket, Thailand.
Oh, wow.
In November. More than just the conference, I just figured it would give me an excuse to go back to Southeast Asia and back to Thailand, which I love. And I've only been in northern Thailand and Bangkok. I haven't been down to Phuket. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'll have to contact you when I come to the area.
Yeah, definitely. We'll go out for some street food for sure. Awesome. Well, another one of the experiences that you wrote to me about was the ayahuasca ceremony in Peru.
Yes.
And am I saying that right? I think,
yes.
Is that how you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that, because that sounds fascinating as well. And that's, again, something that people don't typically do. Like, what was that like? How did you discover that even?
So I was in Peru because I got this like a kind of like a fellowship sort of a thing where it's this public radio producer colleague who lives in Lima with her husband, and she announced this thing. Well, hey, you could come and stay and live with us for a few weeks for like super cheap and like do some reporting or whatever you're doing. And so I thought, hey, that's a really cool idea. I'll have like a home base and get to kind of spend, because that's really my goal when I travel, more than just like parachuting into a place, which many Americans do because they get so little vacation time. That's like the joke when you travel, like the Aussies or whoever will take these long trips, and the Americans are always, people are laughing like, oh, they're there for like an extended weekend. But yeah, no, when I travel, I really like to spend ideally at least 10 days or so in a place, maybe even a few weeks, to really get to know the place well.
Right.
So that's, I find it takes me just a week to really get my bearings. And if I'm really like looking for interesting story ideas and off the beaten path kind of things and get to know the locals, I need to be there for for a few weeks. So in Peru, I was in Peru for several weeks, and I didn't even go to Cusco, Machu Picchu or anything. I still would love to go there, but I was there kind of to work, and I just wanted to really get to know the city of Lima really well and to find interesting stories. And so one of the story ideas, I'll often show up in a place and I'll try to do a little bit of research ahead of time, but it's hard sometimes until you're actually there on the ground. And also my Spanish isn't great. And then just kind of the culture, sometimes you reach out to people and they don't get back to you. That's just how things are. So one of the kind of vague story ideas I had read something about these like local markets. They call them like witches or wizards markets, like traditional medicine, almost like voodoo kind of stuff with like shrunken heads and weird like mystical healing. Some of it's like natural medicine, but a lot of it's more kind of mystical and like casting spells and things like that.
Wow.
So I'd read about that and thought that was interesting. And I was staying at an Airbnb in Lima with this guy, Jeffrey, who lives there. He's Dutch. And so he's lived there a number of years, speaks really good Spanish, knows a lot of people. And so when I was telling him about that idea, he said, hey, you've got to meet my friend Lucho, he called himself a curandero, like a curer. Shaman would be what we would say, but he's very adamant. Don't call me a shaman, call me a curer.
How interesting.
And so he lived in the jungle, like by the Amazon. And he said, oh yeah, I'll come and meet you. It was like an overnight bus trip for him to like come over the mountains, into Lima to meet me. He stayed overnight. And then we took another overnight bus trip up the coast to this little city of Chiclayo in northern Peru, which is not a place that any tourist would go. There's really not very much interesting about the city. It's near like the Ecuador border. And I tagged along with him to go to this like this witches and wizards market. Again, he wouldn't call it that because that's kind of pejorative, but it's like this natural, market, where we went. I followed him tagging along as he went on this quest to search for this star-shaped quartz stone that he had seen in this hallucinogenic vision he had that was supposed to have magical healing powers.
Okay,
and
right.
So that was really, I did this whole episode about that. That was super fascinating. We didn't end up finding it, but it was still really interesting to go on this trip. And then we kept in touch. And then like a week or so later, he contacted me and said, hey, I got hired by these people in this like shanty town on the outskirts of Lima to lead this ayahuasca ceremony. And ayahuasca, people may have heard of, it's this like this hallucinogenic brew that's made from all these plants that grow in the rainforest. It's one of several different healing things that he does, that he brews this up and he gives it to people. It's supposed to cure all sorts of things, both physically and also like spiritually or whatever. If you're going through some kind of stress or trying to figure something out, it's like people taking shrooms or something, I guess. So I tagged along to this ceremony in this little shanty town. It was kind of a very poor, kind of a place I would not have really felt safe going to myself, but I, was tagging along with him and went to this house of these people where they all sat around in a circle. This is, at nighttime, they turned out the lights and they drank these little like kind of shot glasses of this ayahuasca. And then they started having these crazy like visions and some of them were getting really sick. And I have like 4 hours of audio I recorded of this woman like vomiting in a bucket. But yeah, just sitting in the dark and he's like chanting and like playing a harmonica and like, sprinkling like incense on people and, doing all these like spells and everything. And he, has this like tobacco from the jungle, these cigars he's smoking and blowing the smoke everywhere. Super fascinating. So as part of this, he said, would you like to try a little? And I don't do any drugs at all, even pot or anything. Yeah. But I was like, okay, it's like, in the interest of journalism, I'll have like a little bit to
Once
try
in a
to,
lifetime.
to try to kind of understand what all these people are going through to at least get an inkling of, a sense of that. And so he gave me a tiny bit of it. Very bitter, and it actually wasn't as bad as I thought, but it's not pleasant tasting. And it, no, I mean, I guess I don't feel like I had that much less than the other people. It was, maybe a couple ounces, but I felt my stomach was a little, felt a little uncomfortable, but then it went away and I had no other effects on me. And meanwhile, all these people around me are having these weird visions and everything. And Lucho kept turning to me and asking, "Are you feeling anything yet?" I'm like, no. And I felt like almost embarrassed. So that was kind of weird. But I had no idea. I've never, never taken anything like that. I had absolutely no idea what effect that would have on me. And that was, I mean, talk about stories where, or experiences where I kind of go out of my comfort zone. Like that's probably the top of the list.
Wow, yeah.
Because I was definitely a little kind of uncomfortable by that, but it ended up being totally fine. And I figured, if I didn't tell anyone back home that I was doing this till after I did it, because I'm sure they would have been worried.
Right,
but I figured. I read up on this. I did my research. I interviewed this like Jesuit priest who like studied all the shamanistic practices in it, and he was like, he's taken it a bunch of times, and they're like, in this family, they're giving it to like her grandmother, this woman's grandmother, and I figured if they could take it, I'm gonna be fine,
Right, yeah, right.
So again, it's like this kind of sense that people are so afraid of things, in the one standpoint, but like, what do the locals do? Like if they're fine with it, I mean, that's not always the case. Like I won't, you got to be careful sometimes eating street food or whatever, because people's stomachs are used to it in different places. I get that,
Right, sure, yeah.
But in other senses, if local people feel safe doing something, that's not always the case, but I trust what the locals are doing. I feel like.
How awesome. Well, one of the things that we like to talk about on this podcast is that a lot of times your good adventures really begin when something goes wrong. Have you had an experience like that where something went wrong, but it led to an even better adventure?
In Mongolia, we had all kinds of car trouble throughout that whole big journey. And we had our radiator overheated in the middle of the desert in Iran. We blew our head gasket in Turkmenistan, which is like one of the worst things that could go wrong with a car. And we we couldn't get it fixed, and they wouldn't extend our visa. So we had to stick it on the back of a flatbed tow truck and get it towed 6 hours to the border of Uzbekistan, and then wait a week for a new head gasket to get shipped from Dubai. So we had a lot of car trouble, but actually the craziest thing on that journey was not car trouble, but it was just when we just got stuck in Mongolia, because these little tiny cars, the event, it's called the Mongol Rally. And one of the rules of the event is they make you take a little tiny car that like they limit the size of the engine to like 1.8 or 2 liters, which is like a little tiny hatchback. Because the thinking is, it's not suitable for a journey like this, a quarter of the way around the planet Earth.
Right. If you're in like a Jeep or a Range Rover, you're not going to have any kind of adventures.
And they figure that if you break down, you'll be forced to interact with the locals instead of just, zooming through these places. And so it'll kind of give you more adventures, which is all well and good. If I get the idea if you break down a couple times, but in our case, we just had bad luck. And by the 7th or 8th time, it just like really sucks. And you're like, okay, I just want to be meeting more people and seeing adventures. I don't want to be stuck in another garage wasting more money, So that was annoying.
Right.
But anyway, we had this little tiny car, and I mean, part of the deal with the little tiny car like that is it didn't have an air conditioner, because we bought it in the UK, and I think it doesn't get like super hot in the UK apparently, so they don't even I guess need to have air conditioners a lot of times. But these little cars, the engine isn't powerful enough to have an AC, which was fun going through like the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan, which is like the hottest and driest desert in the world.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. But the other thing is these little tiny cars just don't have a lot of horsepower for going up steep hills. And so that was definitely difficult. We're driving, it's a manual car. That was a learning curve. We had never driven before, but trying to like put our foot on the clutch and like a little bit at a time to kind of try to make it up these steep hills. And it was really difficult. And so this one day we're going across Mongolia, and the thing you need to know about Mongolia, at least when we were there, is that if you look at a map of the country of Mongolia, you'll see these lines going, left and right, east and west across the country. And you might assume that, okay, maybe they're not highways, but they're at least paved roads, because these are like the main east-west routes in the country.
Right.
And not only are they not paved in many places, but they're like nothing more than like tracks through the sand and the grass.
Oh man.
These are the main east-west roads across the country. They're paving more of it. And I don't know, nowadays, I'm sure there's a lot more that's paved than when we were there. But when we were there in 2016, there were large expanses that were still not paved. And so you're basically following these tracks of the vehicles that had gone ahead of you. And, just tracks through the sand or grass or whatever. And you're trying to figure out that, there's not a lot of cell service. There's not, you're trying to compare constantly. Like we have like 3 different paper maps. We have like Google Maps there's no cell service, but you start it from your hotel and somehow it keeps going when you're in between cities, in between cell sites. So we're doing that. And then we have this like satellite device and trying to use the GPS on that. And despite all of this, we would still get lost inevitably because the country's just not mapped out very well. And we would, see like a single line on our maps, but then in reality, the road would split 3 or 4 different directions. The path would split 3 or 4 different directions. And we're trying to figure out, okay, where do we go? Or it would split several different directions on the map. It would only be one way, in front of us. And so it was confounding. It was like just maddening to figure out. And there's no signs in the country, no street signs, not signs in Russian or Mongolian, just no signs, period. Nothing. And it also has the lowest population density of any country in the world. So there's not just someone you could ask if you get lost.
Right.
So it's a hard country to get across, especially in these little tiny cars.
And it's big. It's a big place
It's
too.
an enormous country. It's a very big country. It takes several days to drive across. And then there's these river crossings. You'll be driving along and you'll come to this like little creek or this river that, sometimes there was a bridge that used to be there, but then the bridge collapsed and no one bothered to rebuild it. Or there was no bridge at all to begin with. And so you've just got to drive across this little creek. And we're in a little Nissan Micro, which we can't go in very deep water, more than a foot or so deep. So, we this one day we're driving, and there was this one, river crossing we had to drive across, and my brother misjudged on the way out the exit, and so we kind of got stuck, and we had to wait a little while for a truck to come and pull us out. Just these guys in a truck, we attached a tow rope and they pulled us out. And then we didn't want that to happen again. So later on in the day, we saw another river crossing coming up on the map, and we were like, okay, we've got to avoid this. We've got to, is there anything we could do? And we saw that, there was the path, in addition to the main path that led right to the river, there was also a part that like branched out to the right. And we were looking on the map and we thought, okay, maybe we could go that way instead. And it will kind of like circumvent the river. We could avoid the river crossing and, it'll just be easier for us, which is all well and good if you're on flat terrain, but it's very hilly there. And again, our car has very little horsepower. So we start going and, we're going on this path, and at first it's going parallel to the main path, but then it's like veering farther and farther off. And for whatever reason, we stupidly held out hope, okay, it'll rejoin at some point. And we start coming to these hills, and they're steep hills. And I don't know how, somehow we managed to make it up them. But then once we start going down the other side, we're like, okay, we're not going to make it back up the way we came. So we just have to commit to this. Like, we just got to keep going. We have no choice at this point, which was a really stupid decision because we had no idea what we were getting into. So, we, after the second or third hill, we had no choice but to keep going straight. And we found, we found these people at first in these shack that, again, they don't speak any English. We don't speak Russian or Mongolian, but you kind of communicate through hand signals or whatever, drawing lines in the dirt or on our dirty windshields and kind of and saying the name of the town we're heading towards. And can this path that we're going on, will it go to this town? And these people, they have like all these animal pelts hanging outside their house. They're like nomadic people, whatever.
Oh, wow.
And they seem to say, yes, you could, this road would take us there if we understood them correctly. So we're like, okay, that's a good sign. And then, a few hills later, we come upon this little kid who I think he told us he was 10 or 11 years old. And he was like single-handedly, herding this giant field of like hundreds and hundreds of sheep and goats. It's like 11-year-old kid. And we same thing. We said to him, okay, just to confirm, okay, this is the town we're going to, pointing in the direction. Will this road go to it? And he like crosses his arms in front of him. And he's like very adamant, like, no, it won't go there. And we're like, oh man, like it sounds like he really knows what he's talking about, but we don't have a choice at this point. So we thanked him and said goodbye. And so then we came to this place. We went down this, like, it was like this rocky ravine, like a canyon kind of. And at the bottom, there's this little stream, and it was super rocky. And so we just, one of us got out of the car ahead of it to kind of navigate down around the rocks to like tell, okay, turn the wheel a little left, a little right, so we wouldn't get stuck. We get to the bottom and we see it's a little steep going up the other side. And we're like, we hope we're able to make it up there. We didn't even make it like 10 feet out of the stream at the bottom. Like we got stuck right there. We could not get any traction on these rocks. We took out the floor mats and put them under our wheels to try to get traction. Like nothing worked, and we're pushing and everything. So both of our cars were just totally stuck at the bottom of this like canyon area on these rocks and these streams. And it's starting to get later in the day, so the sun's starting to set, and there's these like storm clouds rolling in, and we're thinking like, if there's a flash flood anywhere, this is where it would be, in the stream. Right. And so we're just stuck there, and there's no one around at all. We go to the top of the hill and look around. There's not a single living being in sight. We see this like what they call a gur, like a yurt, way, way off in the distance. And we're thinking, could we walk there and try to see? But we had no idea if there was any person living there. And, if you've ever been to like the Grand Canyon or somewhere, like where if you're looking at a long distance, like it could be deceiving.
You have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. That could be 10 miles away for all you know. Like who knows how long it would take you to walk there? Like you have no way of knowing. And we could get all the way there and there might not be anyone there. So, we're just stranded in the absolute middle of nowhere. And so thankfully we had this like satellite device that we had in case of an emergency, just like this, where we were able to send a satellite text to a friend back in the UK, and we could send him our GPS coordinates, and he was able to relay our message to the American and British embassies in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, which is on the other side of the country. And they were then in turn able to get in touch with local members of the Mongolian National Emergency Management Agency, who sent a team of guys out to look for us. And we freaked out at first. We're communicating back and forth with them by text. And at one point they send us a text that said, it's getting dark. And they're like, okay, do what you can to stay warm and come up, give us your, if there's any landmarks around where you are, if there's a hill or something, and come up with a signal plan, like use flares or something. And we freak out and we're like, wait, are they sending a helicopter? Like, are we going to get stuck with a bill for like tens of thousands of dollars or something? Yeah. And then they said, no, it's just some guys in a truck. We later found out there's apparently no air support in the entire country of Mongolia, so we didn't have to worry about that.
Wow.
But it ended up being some guys in like this truck who came to look for us. It got totally dark. We just, got in our cars. We're trying to stay warm, and the temperature's dropping. And apparently that, at one point they said, oh, the guys are almost there, get ready. And then they didn't come. We're waiting and waiting. And it turns out that they were using a different GPS system than we were or something. So they couldn't find us.
Oh, there was the wrong coordinates, huh?
They were the wrong coordinates. So then they sent out a second rescue team from a different city to look for us. They finally found us like at 1 a.m. or something. Super nice guys, didn't speak a word of English, but we communicated, and to make a long story short, they finally got us back to the main road. They were almost out of gas because they spent so long looking for us. So we had to give them some of our gas. Refused to take any money. That just some peanuts and they said the gas and some water. And super nice guys. And left us back to the main road and left us there. And we said goodbye to them. And then half an hour later, we're woken up by some lights driving up, and we see their truck coming back. We're like, wait, why are they coming back? It turns out it wasn't them. It was the guys from the other rescue team who had been looking for us. And the two teams. Yeah, exactly. And there's like no cell service in this area, so they hadn't been able to communicate with the first team. So they had no idea that we had already been saved and what we had been through. And they're like saying, no, we could. And they're probably thinking, you idiots, like, why did you have to call for help? You're here on the main road. Yeah, exactly. So, so that was an interesting ordeal.
So funny.
But, and then like a few months later, after we got home, we told this whole story to the embassy, the American embassy. We eventually, they wanted to hear our whole story when we got to the Capitol. And so we met with them and everything. And a few months later, they actually emailed us a photo of the American ambassador to Mongolia presenting a certificate of appreciation to the head of the Mongolian National Emergency Management Agency for rescuing us. We apparently were the first American drivers they'd ever rescued. So we made history and we caused an international incident. So
right. That is amazing.
Yeah, there's a famous quote from a travel writer. I think his name's Tim Cahill. He said, "Adventure is physical and emotional discomfort recalled in tranquility."
I like that.
That you're in the middle of it, and you're like, "What the hell?" Like, I wish I could just be home, sleeping in my bed, comfortable, and safe and everything. But you go through it all, and then you're like the life of the party. You're the one everyone wants to talk to at the bar, or hear your story.
I love
And
that.
so,
Yeah.
Leaves you with great stories to tell.
Awesome. So, well, if you could give a piece of advice to new adventurers, what would it be?
I would say leave some room for chance, like for not like don't plan out. I myself have this tendency to, the fear of missing out, like FOMO.
Oh, yeah.
You do all your research, especially now with Instagram and everyone has a travel blog and everything. You want to do all your research and make
Right.
sure, especially if you're like an American who has so little time to travel and you want to cram everything in and you want to go on this whirlwind tour and see, a bunch of European countries in like 3 days or whatever, it's like ridiculous. So I'm a big fan of traveling slower, like seeing fewer places, but really getting to know them well. Like, if you want to see another country, come back, make it its own separate trip. So yeah, traveling slower, like if you're able to travel for longer, but at least slower, don't pack as much stuff in. And then also don't overplan. Like yes, I do. I mean, I still want to kind of check off the bucket list items off my trip, see the main tourist sites, whatever. And I usually get those out of the way in the first few days of my visit to a place. And yeah, I do some research because there is that fear that, I don't want to get all the way back home and then realize, oh, if I just driven 10 miles down the road that way, there was this really cool thing that I could have seen and I didn't know about it and I missed out,
Sure, right.
So there is that fear. So yeah, I do some planning, but I feel like there's a middle ground. Like you could do some planning, but also don't plan out every single day. You don't have to plan at every single restaurant you go to you have a general framework, what you want to do, what you want to see, the top things you want to see, but then allow some time to just explore, just walk through neighborhoods, talk to locals and say, hey, what's your favorite restaurant? Where do you think I should eat at? What's a kind of a cool thing that like, what do the locals do for fun around here? What's something that like a place that, maybe the tourists wouldn't go that you think is really cool, allow some room to explore and just wander around. I mean, you don't want to wander through really unsafe neighborhoods, but, just go allow yourself to get lost within reason. Because sometimes that's when the most interesting, memorable experiences happen.
Great. And is there maybe one country that you've been to that you would recommend that people should see, or one place that you've been to that you would recommend people should not miss?
I mean, I really like Thailand, but aside from Thailand, I really enjoyed Ecuador. It's a very diverse country. Yeah, my brother and I went there a number of years ago, and I mean, the Galapagos Islands are super cool, and that that could be its own trip, obviously, and that's kind of an expensive part of the trip. But even aside from that, there were so many cool things going, from going to the edge of the Amazon and experiencing that to Mindo, the cloud forest or the butterfly area. And there's this thing called the Tarabita, which is like this. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like this tram, it's like open air metal cage thing that you're hanging on a rope, like on a zip line that goes from one side of the mountain to the other. That was super cool. You're like with like 4 people. It's not like super fast like a zip line. It's like traveling. It's like on a motor, but it's like this open air metal cage thing. It's like how they get from one mountain to the other.
A rudimentary cable car.
Yeah, basically. So that was super cool. And we learned how to like make chocolate from grinding up the cocoa beans. This guy was showing us, and we went hiking in this place called Cajas National Park, which is super cool. It's near the city of Cuenca, where it's these, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like these just hills with just like grassland, but we went on this really like overcast, like foggy day, and it was like otherworldly. Like it was so cool. It was just like, it was like we were on another planet or something. It was really scenic and beautiful and fascinating. And then we were there at New Year's Eve. And there's this cool tradition in Ecuador, which I think they do in a lot of Latin American countries, where people make these like effigies, like these stuffed like paper mache dolls. And at midnight on New Year's Eve, they like burn them in these giant bonfires to like represent their fears and worries from the past year.
Interesting. That's
And
neat.
so that was super cool. We happened to meet these other Canadian tourists. We kind of hung out with them when we ventured into this part of the city that most tourists wouldn't go, but it's where like all the celebrations were taking place. And we heard that all this is going to happen at midnight, and we're there and we're waiting. It's like 11, it's like 11:30, and we're like, we don't see anything around. Like, is this really going to happen? But then sure enough, at like 5 minutes to midnight, like people came out of nowhere and they started lighting these bonfires and like setting off homemade firecrackers and like, and burning, these effigies. It was just the most amazing experience. The coolest New Year's Eve I've ever spent.
Wow. Yeah.
So if you go to Ecuador, I recommend going at that time of year, but I think any time it's a really cool country. So yeah.
Awesome. That is super cool. Well, Scott, is there any last message that you'd like to give to our listeners before we finish up today?
I guess just kind of repeating what I said earlier, just that you don't need to take a trip to Mongolia to go on an adventure. Like wherever you are, kind of on your wherever your comfort zone is, or I would encourage people to just in their daily lives, just whatever small steps they can take to kind of venture out of their comfort zone or try something new. That's or great, yeah. Explore a different area they've never been to. I would encourage people to do that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Now, where can people find you and where can they find your podcast?
Sure. So the podcast, again, is called Far From Home. My website is farfromhomepodcast.org, and they could just search for Far From Home on Instagram or Facebook, or in any kind of podcast player that they use. They should be able to find my show.
And we are back. That was awesome. It was so much fun to talk to him.
Yes.
I've always wanted to go on some big adventure like that. And, I was looking up the Mongol Rally that he talked about in this episode. It's an incredible journey. And they have other ones as well. They have the Mongol Rally. They have the rickshaw run where you're given a tuk-tuk and you have to navigate the Himalayas or Sri Lanka or something like that. There's all sorts of incredible adventures hosted by these guys, the adventurists. So maybe, James, someday if we want to do a big push for charity, we can register for one of these, raise some money for charity.
I've always wanted to do the rickshaw rally.
That looks so much fun, doesn't it?
It looks so great. And you get a tuk-tuk. How cool is that?
I just want to say, yeah, guys, go subscribe to the Far From Home podcast. He takes his microphone all around the world, recording podcasts from some really incredible places, giving you an insider look into these places that are totally off the tourist trail. So really a lot of fun. Please check that out. It's such a good show. Good. Well, James, it is time now for our favorite segment, Adventures in the News. And this week, it's my turn. Mine is actually from about 2 months ago, but it's still fairly relevant because we were on hiatus at the time. The oldest U.S. park ranger has officially retired. Betty Reed Soskin has officially retired at the age of 100, which is amazing. So she was a ranger at the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park in Richmond. And the reason that she was working there is because she herself worked for the Air Force in 1942. She became a park ranger at the age of 84. Finally retired at the age of 100. Betty Reed Soskin is an incredible, awesome lady. And she has written a book, which you can find on Amazon. It is called Sign My Name to Freedom, a memoir of a pioneering life. I have not read it yet, but it sounds really good. And what an incredible story. I mean, I would be so lucky to still be working at the age of 100.
I mean, I'll say another point. I just hope I'm alive at 80. I just hope I make it. Like, much less be working.
Imagine being 84 and being like, you know what would be fun? I'd love to be a park ranger.
And it's not an easy job to get.
No, it's not.
It's really difficult to become a U.S. park ranger. But anyway, congratulations on not only a job well done, but on just an awesome life.
Born in 1921, survived the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. She was a civil rights activist, took part in meeting to develop a general management plan for the Homefront Park. She was the California Woman of the Year in 1995. She received the presidential coin from President Obama in 2015, and she got to light the national Christmas tree at the White House that same year. So what a life. And still going strong, 100 years old, finally deciding to step down and retire.
Take it easy. I'm going to get the book. I'm going to go buy that right now.
If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, and please consider giving us a review on your podcast app of choice. Maybe a 5-star review if you're feeling generous. It really does help us out. Before we finish up today, one last reminder of the monthly challenge is to write 100 or 1,000 words describing your hometown or where you live in the style of travel writing. You can find more content on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, where we are Attempt Adventure. You can always get in touch with us to send us listener mail at hello@attemptadventure.com. And if you want to help support the show, check out our Ko-fi page, ko-fi.com/attemptadventure, where you can buy us a beer or subscribe to become a member to help support the show and cover the cost of hosting and all of that good stuff. Folks, thanks as always for listening to the show. Thank you, Scott, so much for coming on the show. It was an awesome episode. Really enjoyed it. Check out Scott again, and links to all of his social media, his podcast, etc. are all in the show notes, which you can find on our website, attemptadventure.com. Thanks as always for listening, and until next time,
keep adventuring.